All right, hopefully you guys are seeing that. So my name is Jerry Roche. I am a member of IT and live in Iowa, but I actually work for our headquarters office in Washington, D.C. So a few years ago, we started a program where folks could live outside of the D.C. area and still work for headquarters. So I haven't been there in a long time. I haven't been there since March of 2020. So it's been a little while, but certainly a lot of work still continues, particularly with the new administration. So, and what I'm going to present today, a lot of this material comes from our partner agency at NHTSA. I've got a colleague there, Essie Wagner, who leads their behavioral science group. And so they're really the ones that really dig into the numbers and track some of these things. Federal Highways does have a role looking at the VMT aspects and even the speed monitoring information and some of our highway performance management monitoring system. But a lot of what I'm going to share is from NHTSA. So hopefully you find this interesting. And so just to look back at the pandemic, this is something that we've never seen obviously before in our lifetime. And so that certainly has played out in our transportation system as well. And so this shows the numbers from 2019 to 2020. If you see here, looking at the bar charts, it's tracking our fatalities. And we start off the year pretty good until the pandemic hit. The pandemic, I think all of us were maybe scared, disappointed, and everything else. But the one glimmer of hope I had was for our traffic fatalities, and that, hey, this should help us, right? If people are staying home, things should be much better as far as traffic fatalities and our carnage that happens in our roadway system. And so this was a different situation than what we normally see with our recessions and such, and I'll kind of talk about that. You see the lines here. This tracks our VMT, and so you see the year started off in January, February. We were matching what we had seen for VMT. Then, of course, we had the dramatic decrease in 2020 when the pandemic really hit, I think began. I think a lot of it as the NBA sort of shut down, you saw a lot of dominoes fall at the same time there in March. I happened to be on the road on travel down in Florida, helping out doing some training videos. And so we were actually traveling home, and so I flew through Atlanta. And it was really eerie. The busiest airport in the United States had nobody. It was sort of a ghost town. And so you certainly see that reflected in our numbers. But then as the pandemic went on, you see here our fatality crashes actually increased, and starting in June, increasing dramatically in June, July, August, September, October, and even into November and December. And so like I said, this was different than what we've ever seen before. Our VMT stayed down. You still see the same trends with summer vacations and whatnot. You see some recovery in our VMT. I think some of that was for essential travel. A lot of that wasn't happening by air, and so it was happening by vehicle. But nonetheless, our VMT still was down from 2019. And just looking at those numbers by quarter, and that's sort of what NHTSA does. They sort of look at 3-month increments, and you see here, looking at our fatality numbers, we were just a tick above, nothing to be too concerned about in quarter 1. We actually were down a little bit in quarter 2, but you again keep in mind our VMT dramatically decreased at that point. We're actually our VMT at the time, our fatal crashes by VMT was 1.45, so a really high fatality rate. And then in that third quarter is really where we saw that jump. We went up 13.6% for that quarter from the year prior. Again, very high fatality rate. And then that followed into the fourth quarter in December. And so the end of the year, we finished with 38,680 predicted fatalities. These are still preliminary numbers. Obviously, there's still a lot of reports that still come in after the fact. And so these will be preliminary until next year. But that equates to a 7.2% increase in fatalities and a 25% increase in our fatality rate. And so the fatality rate last year was 1.37, something we haven't seen for a long time. That fatality number, I think, is our highest since like 2007. So certainly saw some major increases there. Just looking at what that did, I guess, by region, and then I'll talk a little bit just briefly about Iowa numbers. We saw about a 9% reduction or increase in NHTSA's Region 7, these Midwest states, but really an increase of some magnitude in all regions. So, and you can see some of this maybe by you think about risk taking and mask wearing and whatnot, you see out in the Pacific Northwest, very small increase. And then of course down in the Southeast where the pandemic period didn't have as much change, traffic and those kind of things, about a 6% increase. So certainly depended on the state. Looking at Iowa's numbers, you can see that here on this chart, and you see really no effect overall. Looking at the statewide numbers, they stayed about the same, just one increase in fatalities on their roadways. But again, they were actually looking to have a decrease. They were down quite a bit in the early months until the pandemic. And then it picked up in the summer months. In July and August, they had huge increases. I'm not sure what to explain that by. I don't know if the Iowa DOT members might have some thoughts on that. I don't know if that was people pent up inside and thought, okay, now it's a little bit safer for me to get out or go somewhere. Certainly, we saw more people driving, as I said, rather than traveling by airplane or other modes of transit. So I'm not sure the increase there, but that kind of continued as we saw throughout the year. So looking at just sort of the observed environment for the second half of the year, we saw unemployment was up and then it sort of recovered a little bit. Of course, household incomes were down. We certainly saw some layoffs and whatnot. VMT again was certainly down. We certainly recovered some, but never made up for that. One thing I didn't mention before with the VMT to keep in mind is that it's probably the passenger vehicle VMT was actually down more than what you probably realized in that chart because our truck VMT was up. If you think about it, folks were staying at home. There was a lot more Amazon. I think I got kicked out. Are you guys seeing my screen still? Okay, maybe you are.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, am I still in presenter mode?
No.
Okay. All right, let me get back to that. Where was I? I think right here. All right. And so our truck VMT was up. If you think about Amazon shipments and that kind of thing, a lot more deliveries to home. So gasoline sales were down. At one point, they were down dramatically. That, of course, rebounded some. Transit use was down immensely. I think at one point, 85% of our transit use was a decrease from the year before. Looking at, I think it was April or May. We certainly saw a changed travel behavior, changed enforcement, and we'll talk more about that. Looking at travel speeds, seatbelt use, and alcohol and drug use. So I say that in general, looking at the fatal crashes, not necessarily overall, and we can talk about some of those kind of things too. So under a normal recession, as I mentioned, we see a decrease in VMT. Unemployment is typically up at the same time during a recession. We also see like fatal crashes involving alcohol and fatalities in general to go down. That certainly makes sense, at least for myself. You're less likely to go out to a bar, to a dinner. You're going to eat more at home. In a recession, that typically hits two age groups the most, certainly our older residents and then also our younger ones. The younger ones don't have a lot of extra money. They don't have that extra job. There's no need for them to drive. Same thing with our older folks. If they're not traveling, they're hit a little bit more, and so they're more frail when they're on the roadways and have an increased chance of death just simply by being in a crash. And so that usually helps our numbers. Looking at our data from quarters 2 and 3, again, we saw VMT down, unemployment started up and then sort of leveled out. But we saw our alcohol and other risks certainly increase quite a bit. And as I mentioned, the fatalities eventually also increased, which is kind of unique. So one thing that I found very, fascinating when I saw this information presented was looking at law enforcement, and something I hadn't thought about, but we had over 550 first responders that died due to COVID-19, and that's just through March of 2021. So, and 2/3 of that involved law enforcement. It's not something I had thought of much, but certainly interactions with drivers and whatnot, and just citizens in general, transmitted the disease to those folks, and they were hit pretty hard. We obviously had a lot of other things going on with enforcement and sort of the social unrest and whatnot with all the things that happened not too far from here, of course, in Minnesota, but even the demonstrations and whatnot that happened in Iowa. So we saw a huge decrease in traffic safety enforcement. There was a reduction in stops either because of COVID or just the law enforcement concerns in general. And so we certainly saw decreases when you look at the data from DWIs and speeding and seatbelts. And so there wasn't a lot of high visibility enforcement. If they were out there, they really weren't stopping people. Some from an officer safety standpoint doubled up officers, and so that in itself reduces your reach by 50%. And so, and that's something that was sort of verified by the NHTSA regions, talking with the departments of public safety in Iowa and other states. So this shows data by people staying at home. And you see 2019 versus 2020. And so the increase in people, of course, working from home. It'll be interesting to see if this shifts back. I think it will some. For myself, I actually used to work in our Ames, Iowa division office, and I will be working from home full time now. So I won't be going back to the office, and so I'll be contributing to that a little bit as well. But there's actually a website that in DOT that's actually tracking this by month. And so you can actually pull this up for any county in Iowa or across the country. And you can see here, looking at just that 12-month period from March or 13 months, March to March, we had about 24% of the population in Iowa that stayed home. I actually looked at August data. And if you compare August 2019 data to August 2020 data, in August 2019, we had about 7% of the population in Iowa staying home. Makes sense. You've got a lot of family vacations that happen that time of year. August is also when you back to school and whatnot. So our workforce is more on the is commuting and such. Looking at that compared to this year of August 2020, I think we had 29% of the people staying at home, and so big change. I also put in Polk County and Linn County for other presenters here. John will talk about their what they saw there, but a little bit higher than what we saw statewide. Of course, we know with belt use, the risky behaviors, those that were out were probably more risk takers. Those risks also include driving, and so we saw increases in ejections, also speed in crashes, and then also drugs and alcohol. So this looks at ejections, and so this is using EMS data. And you can see the increases in quarters 2 through 4. And so, of course, ejection that typically involves no belt use and also tends to mean higher speeds. And so these are your higher speed freeway type crashes and whatnot, other high speed crashes on other roads. And you see a huge increase in those from 2019 to 2020. When you look at that by age and by gender, certainly it's our males, the 18 to 34, as we know, is the most highest risk group, followed by 35 to 49, and even 50 plus. And the male side were the ones where the ejections were happening. This looks like crashes by type, and so I just threw some of the ones that folks might be interested in. We didn't see a change in pedestrians, which was good. If you think about it, we probably had more pedestrian activity. It's hard for us to track and count pedestrians, but more than likely we had an increase in folks walking, and so for those numbers not to increase, that's a good sign. We did have an increase in motorcyclists, a slight decrease or increase in bicyclists, a little bit of a decrease in large trucks, and so there's a lot less passenger cars that are intermixing with those trucks. And a huge increase in our speed and alcohol-related fatalities, as you see there, 11% and 9%. This is looking at our data by functional class, and so we didn't see as much of an increase in the rural interstates and the rural arterials, if you think about those roadways. However, we did see a 11% increase in our rural collectors and locals. So those are typically, county roads, county paved roads in Iowa. And of course, in the urban area, we saw a big increase in the urban interstate crashes and also the urban collector and local roads. So a 12% increase there. And so something that we may be interested to see what we hear from Cedar Rapids and Des Moines. So this is looking at data from percent speed changes. So this is all traffic. And by and large, in the rural area, we didn't see a lot. When you look at first percentile, that means basically all drivers. And their 99th percentile is those top drivers, highest speed drivers. And so we actually saw a bit of a decrease in major collectors. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe we had a few roadways with a lot less traffic. Maybe we repurposed some of those lanes. Maybe folks didn't need to hurry as much, and so they were taking a little bit more of a slower ride. But in the urban areas, we saw a bit of a change there. Certainly on overall, I think what you'll see with this is probably an indicator of congestion, particularly on urban interstates. We had a lot less traffic, and so those speeds increased when you look at all drivers. Again, probably due to congestion, not being there. So, but overall, not a huge increase, a modest increase in speeds, but not exceptionally high when you look at all drivers. So, as I said, in our speed-related fatalities, we did see an increase, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. This shows the same data looking through September, looking at our rural speeds. And we really didn't see much of a change, except I mentioned the major collectors. We did see a change there, which is kind of interesting for those all drivers, right? But again, not a huge increase, particularly on our interstates. So it wasn't that the general population was driving a lot faster. It was just those risk takers that were driving a lot faster and having issues when they did so. So this data looks at some trauma center data. We'll get into some of this. Just looking at belt use, this is looking at drivers, and you see during the pandemic a decrease in seatbelt usage. Interesting to me. I'm not sure if this is probably a compounded issue with other factors, but we had a lot higher percentage of drivers out there unbelted. Even more so and even more pronounced when we look at the passengers in those vehicles. Only 40% of our folks were unbelted in those fatal crashes, and so certainly saw an increase throughout. This is looking at by drug positive usage, I guess, and so you see in almost all categories an increase in those that were unbelted. And so again, it gets into risk taking, but when you're impaired with various impairments, alcohol or other illicit drugs, again, that sometimes impairs your judgment and again, less likely to wear your seatbelt. And so you get that perfect storm where a lot of those choices can combine to have deadly consequences. So we saw most of that in drivers, just a little bit in pedestrians as well, looking at cannabinoids. But by and large, the drivers is where we saw that. So again, more on the male side than the female side. Looking at BAC, we see it wasn't an increase in all drivers. We had a little bit for drivers in general, but certainly if you look at the numbers, the ones that were statistically significant are those that are BAC of 0.15 or higher. So those that are very impaired on our roadways is where we saw that. And so again, high speeds, high impairment. And just looking at all of our demographics and crash factors, we saw a huge increase in the Black community being killed in crashes. We saw a 20% increase in our occupant ejections, those unrestrained occupants and passenger vehicles, a 15% increase there. Looking at our urban interstates and actually all our urban roadways, 15% increase on the interstates and 12% on the local roads. Speeding, I mentioned the local and collector roadways, we saw a big increase in, again, nighttime and weekend. Again, so all those risks kind of happening at the same time, right? Rollover crashes were also up. Again, a lot of those happen on those local and collector roadways. So again, same with single vehicle crashes, those are happening on those same roads. Alcohol involvement again, and we saw, as I mentioned, a decrease in our large truck crashes and also our older person crashes. So again, less likely to be out, probably more concerned about a pandemic, and so that was the one area we saw a little bit of a bright spot, I'll say. And as I mentioned, I think we covered this quite a bit, but certainly that overlap between the risk-taking groups. And so I really don't know that there's an anecdote, so to speak, but I would think if there is, it certainly revolves around the safe system approach. We certainly know that death and serious injury is unacceptable. I think we're more and more aware that humans do make mistakes and they're vulnerable, right? And so we need to be proactive about that. We share responsibility. It's not just an engineering thing. It certainly involves all of our E's, including EMS and emergency response. And education, right? So, and then the redundancy is critical. And so you've probably seen our Swiss cheese sort of analogy, but if one part of the system fails, we want another part to capture that. And so that involves all safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, our safe road, and certainly our post-crash care as well. So, but that's all I have. I'll turn it over to my colleagues, and then we'll have some time for questions.
John Davis, did you want me to go next?
Yes, why don't you go next?
All right. Just give me a moment here as I bring up my screen share. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can, John.
Awesome, thanks, Jerry. All right, so Jerry said I'm just going to give a local perspective for here in Cedar Rapids as a municipality and what we saw in 2020. So we always pull together an annual crash report, usually in February of the following year, once all of the crash data is kind of settled out through the Iowa crash analysis tool, which is where we pulled all of this data from. And yeah, I was very surprised just based on what we were kind of hearing nationally, what we ended up seeing here in Cedar Rapids. But just a quick background, I think everyone knows where Cedar Rapids is located over here in eastern Iowa. Our city population is 130,000 and our metro area is around 260,000. Within our city, we've got about 800 centerline miles, which roughly 100 are either interstate, urban rural expressway, or state highways. And then the majority of them there are city local roads. But to dive right into it here, so total crashes in Cedar Rapids in 2020, we were down what I would consider a pretty significant amount. You know, kind of just comparing the two previous years, but from 2019 to 2020, we were down about 23% overall. Injury crashes were also down. Fatalities, we cut in half from the previous year. But you know, so that from my perspective, I think that was a really positive thing that we had that reduction. And the only thing that I can really say as to why would be, you know, the reduction in vehicle miles traveled. I haven't seen the numbers come out yet through Iowa DOT on where we were as a state and county by county. But I would suspect we were likely down quite a bit from what we had in 2019. Crashes by month, this, you know, I think, you know, between March and May, when we were really in the throes of the pandemic, when it first hit, you know, we definitely saw a reduction over the other months. And then kind of some of the data that Jerry was showing, we definitely had that uptick in the summer. People were getting antsy, they wanted to get out. So we definitely saw that uptick there. And then as we got into the colder months, and then people started hibernating again, definitely saw a reduction there. An area that I also wanted to touch on were the pedestrian and bicycle crashes. This is the one area where we did have an increase was the PEDs, which is obviously concerning. We were kind of back up to our 2018 levels there with the amount of PED crashes we had, including one fatal. And I mean, I'm not sure what the overall main reason is. I guess a theory I have is, you know, there was more people at home, more people being active, being out there, more exposure, you know, crossing roadways, and just potential to be in a crash would be really the only thing I can think of in that regard. Bicycle crashes, we cut in over half down from 2019, which is a real positive thing. We've had a really big push here in Cedar Rapids to add bicycle infrastructure over the last 10 years. You know, we've been adding protected bike lanes, some corridors, a lot of multi-use path and trail projects, a lot of just your standard bike lanes being added also all throughout the city. We also took a look at it in terms of Linn County as a whole, which obviously the Cedar Rapids metro area takes up a good chunk of Linn County, but overall they saw about the same reduction. I think it was a couple % less overall. But from that perspective, adding in the rural areas, it still maintain that similar downward trend from the previous year. And we don't have a lot of information on speed data throughout the city, but I wanted to throw this in here just to show, I think everyone's familiar with our automated enforcement on I-380, but 2020 was the highest year in terms of number of citations given for the cameras that are on I-380. So it was 20,000 citations over what we issued in the previous high year of 2016. So 17 and 18 and 19, we don't have full data because the cameras were off either for those full years or for a period of those years. But people driving faster on interstates, freeways, I can definitely say that at least here in Cedar Rapids, people were going faster on 380 just by the amount of citations given by those automated enforcement cameras. So just a quick summary, key information from our 2020 crash data. So we were down 23% overall on crashes, 50% reduction in fatal crashes, 24% in injury and overall injury crashes, 55% reduction in bicycle crashes, and then the one that really sticks out was just that 32% increase in ped crashes, which just everything we're working on nowadays is at multimodal facilities, and we want to make things safer for peds and bikes, and that's just something we got to keep working on and making sure we increase the safety for pedestrians. So with that, we can take questions at the end. I'll turn it over to John Davis, City of Des Moines.
All right, thanks, John. Let me share my screen. Let me reshare my screen. There we go. All right. So hopefully you're able to see it just fine. I'm going to give you a brief trends from 2016 to 2020, just maybe a little bit different perspective. Again, City of Des Moines, so the shaded area, the darker shaded area, that are the city limits of Des Moines, and you kind of get the surrounding communities in the metro area. So looking at crashes, 2016 to 2020, zeroing in on the 2020, we saw a decrease in the total crashes from previous years. It's our lowest of the 5 years. Occupancy, the occupants, total vehicles also decreasing. The one bugaboo was fatalities. We almost got close to tripling, or not tripling, but doubling what we had the previous year in 2019. Serious injuries, still seeing kind of more of a downward trend. So looking at it, those crashes, same time period, breaking them out by causations. Here we're seeing the speed related ones, they're decreasing and tending to kind of still see the downward trend a little bit. Impairment decreased slightly in 2020, but more of a flat trend when compared to the previous years. Inattentive, we're I guess all intensive purposes, still seeing a kind of a flat. We're less than the previous year by a significant amount, but it's hard to say that we've really got a good trend going yet. For unprotected injured persons, kind of still seeing an upward trend. Pedestrian crashes, the good is we're continuing in our downward trend, even though we had a slight uptick in 2020. And then pedicycle, or the bicycle, we're definitely seeing a more of a downward trend. And I think that's likely related to the enhanced bicycle lanes and the that we've been installing over the last several years now. When you look at it as a total percentage of total crashes, again, we're seeing kind of more flat. It's still unprotected is still more of a flat trend. So is ped crashes, and so are bicycle related crashes, as well as impairment related crashes. If we just look at fatalities and serious injuries combined, those totals, here we saw in 2020, again, it was more of a low point, but not the lowest, a slight uptick in 2019 from 2019. Speed related, again, not lower than previous, but a slight uptick in 2019. Impairment, a little bit more of an uptick, and actually the high over the previous 4 years. Inattentive, here we're kind of on par with what we saw in 2018 and slightly above 2019. Unprotected, again, kind of more of a trending a little bit more upwards overall. Pedestrian crashes, also kind of tending that same way, a little bit more upward. And then the bicycle trending down. When we look at it from a percentage of the totals, kind of see it's kind of still generally showing an uptick, a trending upward in each of the causations, and then the types of crashes, except for the one that are related that involve bicycles, pedicycle. So kind of that was really a quick snapshot, but kind of the summary is that overall, our crashes went down 2020 compared to previous years. Our fatalities, unfortunately, went up. Serious injuries seem to be kind of more the same. Speed related seem to kind of tend to go down. Impairment, still more level. Inattentive went down. Unprotected injured person went up, as did pedestrian crashes and pedicycle. If we look at it from a fatality and serious injury component, the fatalities were up in 2020, but the total of the two types of conditions went down, and that was for speed related. Unfortunately, impairment went up, inattentive about the same, and unprotected injured persons as well as pedestrian crashes both went up, and then the pedicycle, bicycle, those went down. So a lot of the reasons that Jerry mentioned, I think, are related and have impacts in the different enforcement activities in the city, and also just the general involvement of the citizens getting out and different modes of transportation or travel. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and we can then have the ensuing discussion.
Thank you, Jerry, John, and John. We'll open it up for anybody's questions. You can type them in. There's a chat area, or you can just turn your mic off or turn your mic on, and you can ask as you have a chance. If anybody has a question, we take it right now. Give you a minute. I guess I'll jump in. John Witt, it seems that Jerry's and John Davis's data are pretty similar, and yours maybe is a little bit different as lower. Do you think that's maybe due to the derecho and how it affected the city there?
That's a good question. I can't say for sure. I know that obviously after the derecho here, at least it was chaos. I mean, we had every traffic signal within the city was not operational within about 10 hours of the storm. And, we rushed generators to key intersections. But, from that perspective, I don't think we've dived into the data. And that's something that I think that now that you've asked that question, I think we will, because I think it would be interesting to look to see what really happened with the crashes in the ensuing weeks after. So really hitting the data hard in August and seeing what happened. But, after about 3 weeks, we were pretty much back to normal in terms of the transportation system and getting the roads cleared and, being able to navigate around the city. So I don't think from an overall perspective for the year, I don't think it had a huge impact. If anything, I theorize that maybe we had an increase in August because of it, just with limited sight distance at a lot of intersections, and the signal's not operating. Our main arterial corridor is going to all-way stops at basically every intersection. But yeah, it's a really good question that I don't have a concrete answer for.
Yeah, I would be curious, John, if you saw a decrease in employment, traffic volumes from employment. The 380 corridor by itself has a ton of industry along that, and I assume that more of those folks were working from home or not working. So I don't know that, but it'd be curious to look into your traffic numbers too, and when you have more data on that.
Yeah, we're eagerly waiting for the vehicle miles traveled. I can say, like we talked about, Collins Aerospace, they're our largest employer in the area, and they've had a large portion of their workforce and still are. I know that they're not making any final decisions about return to work until July 1. And then I think from what I've heard from folks that I know that work there, they're going to be pushing, or allowing, if you want to work from home, you're going to be able to do it permanently going forward. So I'm from that perspective, I'm really interested to see what it does to, so Collins Road, which goes right by Collins Aerospace, that's probably our busiest corridor. State Highway 100 has about 35,000 cars a day. I'm curious to see what it's going to do to the ADT on that here in the next few years.
All right, who's got the next question? We got a lot of good people on this call. A distinguished audience.
You could just start calling on people from the participant list if you have to.
We have one.
Jump in. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Chase.
Yeah, this is Chase. Yeah, I'm curious. You guys were talking mostly about 2020 data. Have you guys looked forward into 2020 or 2021, the current year at all? And are these trends continuing as volumes are starting to go back up?
I have not. We get our data quarterly, so we'll probably start to see that be processed. I'll say in July is when we'll start looking sort of back at quarter one. we're certainly very interested in that. There's a lot of people asking those questions to see what has happened. So if it's sort of stabilized or not. So.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it either. I'm actually perversely, I'm on crash analysis tool right now. I was just going to query and see where we're at through. I think they've got everything uploaded on there through the first week of June. So give me a couple minutes here. Maybe John, have you guys looked at 2021 yet?
I've peeked at it a little bit, but haven't made any, trends or multiplication to carry it out to an annual so that it could look at it. The only thing that I've looked at is, the kind of the total crashes as of a week or two ago. We're a little less than half of the 2020 figures. So 2020 we had 4,600, and we've got a little over 2,000 crashes. Fatalities, we've had 8 in the city compared to 23 last year. Serious injuries seem to be more of the uptick. We're not halfway through, and we've already surpassed what would be half of last year. So we're maybe trending a little bit more to what we saw in a 2018, 2017 year. So, but other than that, I haven't had a chance to dig into the other details.
Yeah, just doing a quick look in ICAT. It looks like we're similar to last year. We're about, like John said, we're about half of where we were last year. Right now we're about 805 crashes reported, and I think we finished at 1,700 some. So obviously, as we start getting into some of the summer holidays here, I'm sure we'll see an uptick. But yeah, I think we've had 1 fatal so far this year. So hopefully we stay there, and that's all we have. But yeah, so I think from our perspective in Cedar Rapids, similar to what John's seen in terms of overall crashes.
Interesting. Yeah, it's probably premature to speculate on what could happen this year, but I think as volumes start to reestablish and stuff, it'll be interesting to see how this year plays out.
Yeah, and I think that you could also have a very different second half of the year. I mean, now that the CDC mask guidance has changed, like we're all back in the office here in Cedar Rapids. So I know that this is my 3rd week commuting again, and as we get more and more people getting back to work in the office, I think it could be in the second half we see a big uptick, which wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, it's fascinating. A great conversation today, guys. I got to drop off early, but appreciate this. Interesting.
So I think in the meeting chat, there's a couple of questions. One, maybe Jerry, you could take is how are states considering safe systems approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're certainly, I would say nationwide, I would say we're sort of still in the education and promotion stage. There are some states that have sort of taken it on as their new initiative. I can say for federal highways and USDOT, we are certainly on board with the safe system approach. That goes clear up to our Secretary Buttigieg is in favor of that. But implementing that on a project by project or site by site basis still can be a challenge. Certainly, I see a lot of benefits on the intersection side of things. If you haven't looked at Federal Highway's website recently for intersection safety, we have a safe system approach for intersections that actually comes up with a quantitative score for looking at how the intersection will perform, looking at kinetic energy and some of those factors. So it's an interesting concept that agencies are starting to use. I know Florida DOT is running with that, as well as some other states. Jeff Shaw, my colleague, is sort of the lead of that. But it's still, of course, a challenge. I think when you look at roadway segments, particularly rural segments, and how you sort of look at that. I think one of the things we'll see is we certainly can't look at roadways just with one speed in mind. Not all roadways are equal. In Iowa, we have pretty good and say forgiving roadways with wide shoulders and fairly decent clear zone, and that's certainly not the case nationwide. And so there may be some roadways that are signed and have a lower speed limit based on the clear zone, and so something that is going to take some time for implementation, I think, but certainly excited to see what the future might hold in that as well. So good question.
All right, and then John, I don't know if you could take the next question, which was have you noticed any variation in safety by users by time of day as users are returning to the system? Is any peak hour having more or less impact than before?
Good question. I don't think that is. We run, the report we do yearly, we run all sorts of different metrics on it. I don't think we have anything where we looked at it by time of day, but I know that's something that you can query in the crash system. So yeah, I don't have anything I can add on that. Do you have anything, John, from your perspective, or Jerry?
I don't have anything from mine. We haven't
Okay.
looked at the time of day. I just anecdotally, things are busier. So unfortunately, you expect people to try to occupy the same space at the same time, and they end up having a collision. But
yeah, I could say in general, the wee hours of the night, the off peak, the very low volume is where we typically see a lot of the fatal crashes on the interstate system. Of course, those usually involve speed, but it's on those cases where you may be an urban interstate where you've got multiple lanes but no traffic out there. That the impact angles, if a single vehicle runs off the road, there's a good chance they're going to hit a concrete barrier or something to that effect and roll over. And so with severe consequences and whatnot. And so normally congestion as far as the freeway system isn't a bad thing because speeds are lower. We certainly have crashes, and if you have non-recurring congestion, that can be an issue where you have back of queue type crashes. But in general, where you have recurring type congestion, that usually from a safety perspective is a good thing. And so with less congestion, that can change some things, but I haven't looked at that in detail.
all right, and then we have another question in the chat. It looks like this is focused to either the Johns. Are there any particular predictive safety analysis tools or techniques or recent proactive safety initiatives you are incorporating into design projects? And I guess from the Cedar Rapids perspective, besides roundabouts. So I'm not sure why Tyler is calling you out for that, but anyhow, as you formulate your response, I'll just jump in and say that we're looking in the city of Des Moines, the predictive safety analysis tools, techniques, not so much, although we have looked at one of the data analytic applications that's out there, did a little demonstration to kind of get a sense or confirmation on an intersection, and we're considering how we're going to incorporate that in the future that's more predictive fashion. But as far as initiatives that we're doing in design, we're looking at reducing, going with road diets, adding bike lanes, and really trying to make the community more walkable in our downtown area as well as outside of the downtown area, and following along with the transportation master plan that was adopted back in 2018. So, John, if you have anything to rebut as far as roundabouts or anything else?
Yeah, a big push for us now are road diets. So we've been doing quite a few 4 to 3 lane conversions, adding the center 2-way left turn lane. And most of those we're also adding bike lanes as well. And we've been doing that a mixture of both in-house and then also just through our general CIP program as well. But I think we've been seeing some positive results in that, reduction in speed on some of these roads, eliminating a lot of the nasty rear end crashes that you can have with those. And I know he said he was excluding roundabouts, but we have a big push for roundabouts here in Cedar Rapids. We've got, I think number 6 and 7 will start construction here this year, and we've got another. I think it's upwards of 15 that are in the planning stages, and then hopefully moving into design here in the next few years. And then another big push we just started, mid-block crossings for pedestrians. We're identifying corridors where it makes sense to add and leveraging the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which I think a lot of people on this call would agree. It's a really good solution. High yielding rates and used in the right context can really make it safer for pedestrians. So we're identifying locations where we can get in a median refuge with those, and then implement those in corridors where maybe we have a half mile or a mile between signals, but it's on a more of a collector type roadway where it makes sense to add those enhanced crossings.
All right, and then we have another question that's in from Brian with regards to any changes, even though traffic volumes were down, any changes from a neighborhood traffic calming request perspective. And I can say in the city of Des Moines, while traffic volumes were down, that meant people were staying at home. They were now spending more time looking out their front window. And our request for traffic calming or traffic taming has really increased significantly over the last 14, 15 months and continues to as well. So
probably true because of more walking and biking, I would guess too, right, John? There's probably more people experiencing, vehicles at higher speeds going by and things like that too. So
yeah, and probably in many cases it's their neighbors that are now going down. It's not so much the cut through traffic, it's the typical traffic in terms of it's the folks that live in the neighborhood that are the ones that are generally the ones that are speeding. So
on our end, I think we probably had the same amount of traffic calming or speed related complaints from our citizens. And we collect most of our speed data ends up being on local residential streets. Just to, we try to respond to every inquiry that comes on, and we saw the speeds being very similar within the neighborhoods. I would say on, some of the arterial and more collector roadways, I think speeds were maybe up a little bit, but on our local roads, they seem to be similar, but.
All right, I see that Jerry posted a link to the FHWA information on a safe system approach for intersections, so everybody can grab that copy. Earlier in the chat, I posted the link to the survey form so that you can get your professional development certificate. And if there's no other questions, I'll just turn it back over to Rob.
Hey, John, this is Andy Swisher. I might throw out one for Jerry real quick.
Go ahead.
Jerry, nice to see you, buddy. Hey, just curious, you had mentioned in your presentation the relative changes to law enforcement and personnel being down because of COVID and the other societal impacts. Are you hearing of any conversations nationwide of, changing law enforcement techniques because of all of this that may have further implications for our safety numbers? And I guess where I'm going in my mind is maybe there's an advocacy role for ITE as a bigger partner to help with the safety side. Maybe this gives us yet another avenue to pursue. So.
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy. I think in general, yes, there's a nationwide concern about traffic safety enforcement and the equity of enforcement and whatnot too. So I think that's certainly being looked at under a microscope. I can say our sister agency is very interested and concerned about that, and trying to do the best they can at sort of dispelling the issues. You think about, and certainly you want to do it in an equitable manner, but there's a lot of folks that have been, captured, due to traffic safety enforcement. I think back to the Oklahoma City bombing, and Timothy McVeigh was caught because he was pulled over for speeding. And so I think there's certainly a use. We certainly see traffic safety enforcement as part of the cog, right, of what we do. And so to lose that leg of the stool, I think would be a real mistake and challenge for us from a safety perspective. And so there might be better ways to do it better, and I think agencies are looking into that. But it'll be interesting to see where all that goes. One thing I should point out too is my law enforcement friends will say, traffic safety enforcement doesn't always mean writing a citation and some of those things too from an equity standpoint. There are other systems too that don't involve human interaction with speed enforcement cameras and those kind of things like you see in Cedar Rapids, and so those can be something that's seen as more equitable in cases as long as they're installed everywhere, so to speak. But certainly something to advocate for. I think for ITE, I think they would welcome your support.
Well, thanks again, Jerry, John, and John. I am going to see if I can share my screen here. Hopefully, are you seeing my screen now?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can figure this out. It won't let me do what I need to do. Okay, here and
There we go.
okay. Yeah, doing this will get us what we need. Are you seeing it in slideshow now?
Not yet.
No. There we go. And that's still not what I want. Okay.
Display settings. If you go under display settings, pull that down, and then duplicate your show or swap, either one. There you go.
Thank you, Jerry. So I just wanted to give a quick update of our upcoming events and meetings, and these aren't necessarily just ours. The Iowa section, we have a social coming up July 15th. It will be outdoors. We have chose to do Rock Creek State Park over near Grinnell, with the section now encompassing the whole state, instead of being the Iowa chapter, which was mostly just the Des Moines Metro. We've chosen to kind of pick a spot that is more central to where our members are. And most of our members are Des Moines Metro and Cedar Rapids area. The section does not necessarily include Council Bluffs because that's part of the Nebraska area with Omaha. But we will have a social there to hopefully get as many people as possible. And again, it's outdoors. We'll have food and beverages and some outdoor games and just hopefully a nice social for everybody to get back together for the first time in a long time. We have an outdoor shelter scheduled, so if it is raining, we at least have a dry spot that we can hang out. Hopefully it's not torrential rain and it's safe for us to hang out under that. We have sent out an email that if you are interested in carpooling, if you're vaccinated, reach out and we will see if we can accommodate people that way. Next up, there's the ITE International meeting. That is July, those dates in July that are shown. I will say that the early bird registration is today and the price goes up after today. So if you're interested, go check it out on the ITE's website and they will and get registered. There's also the ITE International Council and Committee meetings that kind of go along with the international meeting. Those are August 3rd through 5th. Moving along, we have the Movite Fall District meeting is October 6th through the 8th in Springfield, Missouri. I believe they're going in person on that one. We've kind of been hoping, and we were hoping with the last one that it would. So,
hey Rob, this is Andy again. That right now everything is planned to be in person in Springfield in October, so we're really looking forward to that. And in addition to that, again, being one of the first districts to come back in person. I know there will be a couple of others that happened before us, but not very many. But we are expecting to get some good representation from the ITE International Executive Committee with Alyssa and Randy McCourt and Bev and a few others in attendance at our meeting. So highly encourage everybody to show up if you can. It should be a good meeting, and I know the local arrangements committee is still pulling together a lot of details. So look for more information on that to come.
Great, thank you, Andy. Good to hear that it is going to be in person, and that we might have some pull to get the international people there. Next up, Iowa section meeting for August. It's to be determined exactly what it is. We have some ideas that we're working on, and just want to make sure we have the details hammered out before we send out the information with it. Beyond that, getting into November, we have the Iowa section. We're looking at having an annual meeting. Our discussion is it's going to be probably a half day. More information will follow. We're going to team that up the day before the Iowa Traffic and Safety Forum, which will be November 17th. So that's why it's going to be at the Gateway Hotel in Ames. Again, we're still kind of getting all the details worked out, so there will be more information to come on those. At least from our side, the Traffic and Safety Forum, I'm sure they will be sending out their information when they get enough pulled together with that too. And we are coordinating with them as far as timing and dates so that everything works out. John mentioned the survey that it's in the chat, but here's the link to it. I'm guessing you probably can't just click that link, but if you go into the chat portion of the meeting, you should be able to find that and click the link to fill out a survey about today's meeting, as well as give information so that we can get you a PDH certificate. And then one last thing that I don't have a slide for is we are looking for a couple of volunteers. One is a communications chair, and they would help with updating our website, sending out communications as far as meetings and those types of things. The other position is a student liaison position, which would help organize with the school organizations of ITE. So if you're interested in either of those positions, you could reach out to one of the board members, and we can certainly help you with the information on that. Let's see if I can stop my, there we go. Okay, so I appreciate everybody coming today, and I hope you learned a lot from our presenters. I thought they did a nice job in giving us a lot of information, And I would like to thank Jerry, John, and John one more time. And then everybody else have a nice day.